for the introduction. Let me share my screen. Can you confirm you can see my screen through?
Yes, I can.
Sure. So let's get started. So this is a 0.0 version of this draft we presented in IETF 108. So let's go see what is seamless SR and what are the use cases and how does the solution work, and some interesting examples. And I have, if time permits, we also can see a few more architectural aspects of seamless SR. So seamless SR is based on seamless MPLS architecture. So for those, a small introduction of what is seamless MPLS architecture, right? So if you have a very large network, so you organize your network into multiple IGP domains. For example, your access can be in a separate IGP domain, your aggregation network in another IGP domain, and your core network can be in another IGP domain. So if when your services are running from access to access, so you will need an MPLS connectivity from your access from one side to the access on the other side. And BGP-LU is a mechanism that is used to provide that end-to-end connectivity. So this is what is called seamless MPLS. So prior to seamless MPLS, the service prefixes had to be configured on the border nodes as well. Like, for example, you have an access domain, so you will configure the services on your access device, and then and from that domain where it exists on that node as well, and then when it enters the next domain on that node, on that border node as well. So that was very complex. So seamless MPLS kind of made this very simple, so that the service prefixes can be configured, or services can be configured only on the access, and your BGP-LU provides you seamless connectivity from access to access across multi-domain network. So seamless SR, it extends seamless MPLS. So it provides additional features such as end-to-end slicing. It supports native MPLS for IPv6 networks. So which was kind of not covered in the seamless MPLS architecture. With seamless SR, you can do native MPLS for IPv6 networks. And it also has facilities to interwork with other IPv6 technologies. For example, MPLS over UDP, MPLS over GRE, SRM6 and SRv6. So if it's possible that your core network or your backhaul or your network remains MPLS, but your data centers are running one of the newer technologies like MPLS over UDP or SRM6 or SRv6. In this case, the seamless SR also provides end-to-end connectivity in a seamless fashion. And it accommodates other technologies as well. For example, if your network is in some part of your network is running LDP or RSVP, so seamless SR also provides connects those domains and provides end-to-end connectivity. So some of the requirements of 5G networks include, massive bandwidth requirements like front haul may need 10 gig to 25 gig, and whereas backhaul would need 100 gig to 400 gig bandwidth. So timing and end-to-end latency is very important in 5G networks, because many of the network functions are virtualized and they are deployed in data centers. And because of this, you may have to apply these network functions across multiple data centers, and you may have to use the transport network for to be able to access these virtualized network functions. And for this reason, timing and end-to-end latencies becomes very important in 5G transport networks. 5G is also expected to increase the node scale to a very high number, at least 10x, right? That's what is the number people talk about when people look at the 5G network scalability. So because of this very high scale, very high scale of the network, operationally the network has to be simplified. There should be fewer protocols, they should be stateless and programmable. So reliability is also very important in 5G networks. So the node link and path protection has to be provided end to end. And another important thing is end-to-end service differentiation. So the path that you are going to create through your network has to be, even when it crosses multiple domains, it has to satisfy the constraints and the SLAs, and even if it's multi-domain, the end-to-end path should be satisfying all the constraints that services require. So this kind of brings in some limitations in the existing seamless MPLS architecture. So the existing seamless MPLS architecture does not, the BGP LU does not support multiple creation of multiple paths end to end. So BGP, so if you have a remote PE to which you have to connect, then BGP LU can give you just one single path, which is the best path. And that best path selection will be based on BGP's best path selection algorithm. So if you want two paths to the remote node, one is low latency and another is low cost, and then you want to put your different services, one on low cost and another on low latency, that kind of flexibility is not there in BGP LU. So let us see some of the use cases, customer use cases where these seamless SR is applicable. So the most common one is the service provider networks. So you can imagine a large service provider network that consists of a large number of nodes. So this number of nodes can go in the order of 100K. So this is more applicable for Indian operators because India and China have networks which consist of this large scale of number of nodes already, right? Reliance and Airtel, this kind of service providers, they already have the nodes in the network which are in the order of 100K. So for such a large network, so you obviously have to divide your network into multiple IGP domains. If you see here, access is one domain, aggregation is another IGP domain, and core is the third IGP domain. And then you need to create end-to-end path and along with multiple paths to the same loopback, which satisfy certain service level objectives. And low latency is another kind of service level objective that needs to be met in these kind of networks. So large scale WAN networks is another use case. So imagine somebody having a large scale WAN network, right, that consists of several thousand nodes. So they would want to create smaller IGP domains, because if you put several thousands of IGP nodes in a single IGP domain, what can happen is the blast radius of the events can be so huge that any event in any part of the network will disturb the whole entire network, and every node has to recompute the shortest path when there is a link flap in one part of the network. So it's generally seen, right, large scale WAN networks, in some part or the other, there will be some link that will be flapping, so that this causes some kind of a instability in the network. So the goal is to reduce overall state on the device and create for a smaller fault domains. So for these, when the smaller domains are created, this traffic engineering end to end, for example, PE1 to PE2, you should be able to create multiple paths, each satisfying different set of constraints. And one of the most important use case is data sovereignty. We will see in detail what data sovereignty is and how this seamless SR solves this problem. Third use case is data center interconnect. So we can imagine data centers, you see on the left and on the right, we have data center domains. They are in separate IGP. And then core is another domain. And then BGP is used to provide end-to-end connectivity. So certain use cases, data center applications, they require end-to-end path diversity. If you can see, there's a red path and there's a blue path end-to-end. And they completely use diverse paths and they don't share any node or any link between each other. Another most common use case is low latency path. And the service routes, that is your one of the other requirement is to avoid creation of service route on these ABRs. So you can imagine there are servers sitting behind these leaf nodes on both the sides. And if we don't do seamless MPLS or end-to-end connectivity, all those server prefixes have to be also on these border nodes, which is kind of operationally very complex to manage those kind of networks. So the end-to-end MPLS connectivity has to be from leaf to leaf, and then path diversity across multiple domains is the requirement. So before we move on to the solution section, any questions? Okay, we can take questions at the end. So hello, just want to make sure you
Yeah,
guys can. Okay,
go ahead. I think I would, please, people can ask their questions in the Q&A, and
sure.
I will let Shraddha know that there is a question if it's on the slide, or we can take all the questions at the very end. But please use the time to ask questions. Thank you. Go ahead, Shraddha.
Sure. So So, so what's the solution to provide end-to-end traffic engineered path, right? So, there are certain concepts. I will go through those concepts first and then explain how the BGP extension. So, there's a transport class. The transport class is um, a set of constraints, you know, that your end-to-end path will satisfy. For example, here you can see this red path shown. This is a set of constraints, and then it's the same set of same set of constraints are applied in each of these domains. And it, these set of constraints are represented using a transport class. So transport rib is a set of tunnels that satisfy that belong to a transport class. For you can see every border node there is a rib which is routing information base. Yeah, you can see that there is red, blue, and yellow, which is like red will contain the red tunnels which belong to red transport class. The blue will contain the blue transport class, and the green will contain the green tunnels corresponding to the green transport class. So there is a new BGP family called BGP-CT. So this family uh, uh, it is responsible for creating multiple end-to-end paths and stitch them all together. So there is a route distinguisher in the BGP-CT. So generally a BGP advertisement consists of what is called as NLRI, so network layer reachability information. So that consists of a prefix. So in addition, here in BGP-CT, it will also consist of a route distinguisher. So you can imagine for the PE5 loopback, when BGP-CT is advertised, it will be, let's say 5.5.5.5 is the loopback. There will be three NLRIs will be advertised. One will have 5.5.5.5 and then route distinguisher 1. Second one will have 5.5.5.5 route distinguisher 2, and third one will have 5.5.5.5 route distinguisher 3. And there is another attribute, which is route target attribute. So this is carried in the BGP CT advertisement, and this um, uh, uh, route target will contain the transport class information. So this is very similar to a VPN advertisement where you have RD and RT. In VPN advertisement, the route target represents VPN membership. In BGP CT advertisement, the route target represents the transport class membership. So in addition, there is a mapping community. This is an usual extended color community, a color extended community, and it contains information like how the service mapping should be done for those tunnels. So let's see how the forwarding plane looks like. You can see here that the prefix PE5 for this loopback. The loopback is 5.5.5.5, and there will be an RD associated with that. And then there will be a route target which specifies red. And then PE5 will allocate a label L1. It will send it to ASBR7. And then ASBR7 will set the next hop to self. It will change the next hop as well as it will change the label and then advertise further. So this happens on every border node. So you can see border to border node everywhere. The next hop is changing. The label advertisement is changing. So that's how when PE1 will receive an advertisement for PE5 with the label L5, and next hop is being set as ASBR1. So what happens here is this PE1 will find a red tunnel to this ASBR1, and then it will resolve on that tunnel. And so this happens at every border node, right? So this prefix for PE5, when this advertisement comes, it will take this label L3 and then further resolve it on on the next hop, which is ASBR5, and then when it resolves, it will use the red tunnel to reach to the ASBR5, and that's how your end-to-end path is built. And so this is the bottom part of this slide shows how the data packet gets forwarded. So you can imagine here a data pack customer is connected on this PE, and his data packet is this. This is an IP packet, let's say. So first on that, the VPN label will be pushed. So you can see this gray label is a VPN label. So VPN label is LV1 that VPN advertised here. And the next label that will be pushed is L5, which corresponds to what ASBR gave for this PE5. And then on top, there will be the intra-domain tunnel label. So here I've taken an example where FlexAlgo is deployed in this metro region. So there will be a FlexAlgo label. So when it comes to ASBR1, the FlexAlgo label, which is corresponding to this domain, that would have been already popped. And you can, this L5 label get exposed on ASBR1. And then L5 will be swapped with L4 here. And then the packet comes here, which will, now L4 is exposed when it reaches ASBR3. It will swap that L4 with L3. And then on top push the SRTE label. So here I've taken this domain has deployed SRTE. So it is multiple labels to reach ASBR5. So these labels get pushed. And then that continues, then continues every domain that intra-domain label gets popped, the BGP-CT label gets exposed, that gets swapped with another BGP-CT label, and then the packet is forwarded further. And then if there is any intra-domain label, that gets pushed on top. And when packet finally comes here, it's just the VPN label that is getting exposed here. And then you will send the packet out to the customer on the PE5, on the remote PE. So the forwarding plane, there's no change from what Seamless MPLS was doing. Seamless MPLS was doing exactly the same thing. These pink labels here would get advertised by BGPLU. Instead, that is getting advertised by BGP-CT here. And then it's also satisfying the transport class that is required end to end.
Shraddha, can you go back to the last slide? There are a couple of questions that this
Sure.
thing. One question, let me ask, and then we will take the Q&A. This thing, how do we sync the meaning of red across all these domains? Like, since we say we are talking about end-to-end QoS, how do we make sure the meaning of red, whatever the constraints that are, like in this case, for instance, the what kind of flex algo that we want to use between the domains? How are we syncing that? Is that via configuration, or is it also the part of BGP signaling?
So the independent domains, right? Let's say this Metro 1, this Core 1 and Metro 3. So let's say FlexAlgo 128 represents certain color constraints. So let's take some example of that, right? So avoid all 1 gig links. Let's say that is the constraint. Okay, the red constraint. So FlexAlgo operator will, when he defines the FlexAlgo in this domain, he would have defined for 128, he would have defined exclude all red colors. And in this domain, we have deployed SRTE. So let's assume there is a controller here on top. And the constraints to that controller would have been input that exclude all 1 gig links. And the color of this LSP is red. And then PCF would have downloaded that red colored LSP on ASBR3. Let's assume Metro 3 is again FlexAlgo, and it is same. So here operator is making sure, because this whole network belongs to the single operator, he's making sure 128 means avoid red 1 gig links. And he is making sure every domain has intra-domain tunnels have been created with red. Now when BGP comes in, this route target will be same 128. The color red means it carries the extended color, route target community, which is which will have the value 128. So it's the same 32-bit number, right? So now now when the advertisement comes in, he can advertisement of BGP-CT comes in here, it will look at this route target and resolve on the red tunnel. And that's how that connectivity happens from red to red. So one more thing is, let's say this Metro 3 network was belonging to some other operator before, right? And some merger happened, and now it's part of this this service provider. And when it was part of some other, it was under some other administration. Let's say red meant something else, right? It did not mean exclude 1 gig links. It meant maybe say use 1 gig links. Let's just take opposite, right? So let's say red meant to use 1 gig link. So if so there are two options, right? One is you can go ahead and change all the configs on this network and make sure 1 gig means exclude red, and wherever the FlexAlgo, then make those FlexAlgo definition changes, and then use the same red color throughout. So there is also another option with BGP-CT, because BGP-CT is very flexible. So what you can do is, in this network, you can make you can reconfigure your route target from red to let's say in this network blue means exclude 1 gig links. So then you can remap your route target from red to blue in this domain, so that via configuration, so that when the advertisement comes, this particular domain will resolve on blue tunnels instead of red tunnels. Does that answer your
Thank you.
question, Dhruv?
Yes, I understand. There were some other questions, so let's take those now before because otherwise we will run out of time. So one question is, how is the LV1, the label for VPN, provided to PE1? Is it via IGP or is it via BGP?
Yeah.
So
So
of course,
imagine there is one top level RR here, route reflector. So it can go from the BGP VPN route will get advertised to that route reflector, and then from that route reflector, it will come to the PE1. So it can also be a hierarchy of RRs here. like Metro 1 has one RR, Core has another RR, and then Metro 3 has another RR. And then this VPN prefix will go from here to that first RR, and then from there to the top Core RR, and then to the Metro RR, and then it comes. The, the, the main important thing here is this VPN route is not getting installed in any of these ASBR routers. And it is going only from via RR, where uh, the RRs are just, they are advertising, right? They are not creating any forwarding state for that VPN prefix. And then it comes here to the PE.
So
So what's the advantage of avoiding those service routes in those border nodes, right? So service routes will be very large in number. You can imagine a customer coming and connecting here, and then his prefixes will be huge number. Those that huge number of routes are getting avoided in these, so you can go with the smaller footprint devices instead of going with very large footprint
yeah,
device.
Yasha, the next question is, can you compare this to on-demand Nextstop, the ODN solution, and especially if how is it better from when compared to ODN?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So ODN solution, you can imagine there is a centralized controller here, and then it will, that centralized controller, what it would do is when the service prefix comes, it figures out that, hey, this guy does not have reachability to PE5. Now I need a reachability to PE5. So PE1 sends a request to ODN, and then that guy, this guy has all these databases. You can Metro 1's database, Core's database, Metro 3's database. So he can build a path from PE1 to PE5. So he builds that path. It's basically a stack of SR labels. And then you can create an end-to-end path from PE1, and then that label stack will get downloaded on PE1, and that's how you get connectivity from PE1 to PE5. So how this is better from that architecture, right? You can imagine, one node having to learn the database of all these domains. And we are talking about a scale of in the order of 100K nodes. It's a huge database. So having this huge database in a single node learning this, and then reacting to, like, some link will be flapping in some domain, and then you have to recompute your path. This is all very kind of scale up architecture. I mean, 100,000 nodes today, so you have something that works for 100,000 nodes, and tomorrow your scale increases 150,000 nodes, then you have to make sure your controller is able to handle your 150K nodes now, and then be able to um, support that kind. So it's kind of scale up architecture. Whereas here, this is a scale out architecture because it's distributed. So there may be a controller here, but that controller will look only at this domain. It will not look at the other domains. It will not receive the database of other domains. It will not do traffic engineering for that domain. It will only do traffic engineering inside the domain. So this is kind of much more scalable architecture, and it allows for heterogeneous networks. For example, if this RSVP is deployed in this domain, you can continue to use RSVP, and you can only move to SR only when you're ready and you have upgraded all the nodes and all. But if you think of ODN, right, minimum thing that you require is, if RSVP is running in this domain, uh, you still are going to create end-to-end paths using SRTE. So, these nodes have to be upgraded to support SRTE, the PE nodes. If that is not the case, then the ODN architecture does not work. Whereas this
Uh,
architecture, this can be LDP, and you can still use that.
Yeah, Shraddha, the counterpoint that Mithu is posting is maybe if we have hierarchy of controllers, then ODN plus hierarchy of controllers, sort of like ACTN, should address scalability issues. But I think let's move on because, like, we have only 5 minutes left. So let's cover if any other key things. There's one more question: how is it different from egress peer engineering with BGP LU or BGP LS? So if you can answer this very, very quickly.
Yeah, so this is egress peer engineering. You can imagine a core router, peering router, right? So peering router connecting to another service provider from where you're learning some internet routes, and you want to make a choice of, you can imagine a router situated here, which connects to another service provider. And then it's connected via multiple links to that another service provider network, or you have taken multiple links from different service provider networks. Now you want to choose whether I go left or whether I go right to via this link or that link. That's where egress peer engineering is used. Whereas this BGP CT is from a PE to PE connectivity inside a provider's network.
Go ahead, Shraddha. So you have 4 more minutes.
Sure, let's quickly see a data sovereignty use case. So here there are multiple, it's a service providers network, tier 1 service provider network, which kind of spans the entire world, and it is crosses international borders. Let's say multiple ASs. Each AS, let's say, represents a continent, right? And now you can, from this PE1 to PE2, you can go either AS1, AS2, AS3, or you have a shortest path, which is AS1 to AS3 directly via ASBR5. So data sovereignty requirement is avoid, so any traffic that some traffic that is coming in from PE1, which is to go to PE2, must avoid these two nodes because they are situated in a country, and there's some sensitive data that this particular application must not go through these two nodes. And this is very strict requirement. It should never ever cross these two nodes and links of these two nodes, which are situated in a particular country for which this data sovereignty requirement has been defined. So in this case, let's see how we can create this. So if you generally use BGP-LU, right, it would go through ASBR1, ASBR5, and then go to PE2. So um, uh, we can imagine the red LSP gets created on ASBR4. Let's say that constraints represented by red, and then there's a red LSP which goes from ASBR4 to PE2. We can see that from ASBR5 there are no red LSPs because both paths are going through A and C. So the constraint avoid A and C is not met, so no LSP is created on ASBR5. Now in each of these domains, right? So this avoid A and C is not really applicable because this is geographical, right? But these two nodes are located in this country, and this AS is in this continent, and that constraint is not really applicable in AS1 and AS2. So traffic can take best effort path in AS1 and AS2. So BGP-CT gives you this flexibility where you can say that if there is a red path, go on red path, and if it is not there, go on best effort path. So that policy will be defined in AS1 and AS2, whereas in AS3, there will be a very strict constraint. If red path is there, then take the traffic to red path, and if it is not there, just drop the traffic. So these policies are set up, and BGP session is created, and then these LSPs are created. And then you can see that you get an end-to-end red path from PE1 to PE2 that satisfies these constraints in AS3. And you can see, so this is kind of what we discussed already. So this is just spread out from PE1 to PE2, and then BGP CT advertisements, and then how the packet forwarding looks like. So that's pretty much what I had. We can take questions if we have time. Hello?
There was one question that was asked earlier. This was when you were describing the 5G use case. How does the transport end-to-end with 5G end-to-end QoS point of view? I'm not Srinivas. I've actually allowed you to talk. So if you want to ask that question live, maybe you can quickly ask because I was not able to parse.
Sure. Thank you. Am I audible, Dhruv?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Shraddha, for a very good presentation. So my question was, since the this VPN IDs, the LV1 you mentioned, is already transferred via route reflector and not visible to uh, the intermediate nodes. Now the question comes is 5G QoS. When we look at it from the slicing perspective, is every slice is an individual QoS policy, and how does that get mapped to the transport network slices, what you defined here actually, because the slice is absolutely transparent now, not visible here, and if somebody wants to have end-to-end slice characteristics they want to monitor.
Yeah, so slicing mostly involves not only end-to-end differentiated forwarding path, but also the QoS behaviors on every node and link inside each of the domain. So there are two things here. One is forwarding path, and another is QoS, right? So for end-to-end slicing, there are multiple proposals. One proposal I have seen is, it combines kind of QoS with forwarding path and comes up with for every slice a different label inside these domains. And that label tells you what forwarding behavior you should apply for this particular slice. There could be another kind of approach where the forwarding path remains same. Like for n number of slices, these IGP labels remains the IGP label or FlexAlgo label remain the same. But based on certain parameters in the packet, you define what QoS policies you should apply for this packet. So there are, I am sure there are many proposals in IETF for how identifying a slice. Some may use some fields in the flow label, some may use the label itself, some may use the VPN label as a slice identification. Someone might introduce another slice label, insert another identifier in the packet, which every node will look into and derive the slice, figure out what slice this packet belongs to, and then apply the per hop behavior. So that's kind of summary of various solutions available, and I think this BGP-CT will accommodate those solutions, because BGP-CT only gives you the forwarding path. The QoS behavior, you could apply any of those on top of this.
Thank you,
Okay,
Shraddha. Thank
thank
you, everyone, for asking very good questions, and thank you, Shraddha, for excellent presentation. Best of luck with the proposal. So, could you unshare so that I
Yeah,
could move to the next
sure.
one? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so the next one, we have another very interesting talk. This is Nest Network Stack Tester. This was presented in the IRTF Applied Network Research Workshop by Mohit P. Tehlani from NITK and more PhD students from the center. So we'll start with, and those people are also available in today's call. So thank you for attending. So, but let me introduce Mohit first. Mohit is the faculty for computer science and engineering at NITK Surathkal in Bangalore. He's the member of steering committee for NS3 network simulator and co-mentor for TCP and traffic control modules in NS3. And in the past, Mohit has given us very good presentation on QoS earlier. So that shows his in detailed knowledge about TCP optimization, Linux queue discipline, and Wi-Fi rate adaptation. So off to you, Mohit.
Thanks, Dhruv. Am I audible?
Yes, Mohit. Go ahead.
Okay. So let me know when my screen starts appearing.
Your screen is up. You can start.
Okay. Thank you very much. So good evening, everyone, and good morning. I think we have some people from US as well. So this is, as Dhruv said, this is a work that we had presented at Applied Networking Research Workshop just last month on July 30th at ANRW. So this is a small bit of a tool that we have designed. It was mainly designed for our own purpose to foster our own research here at NITK. Like he mentioned that I have been working on TCP optimizations and Linux queue disciplines. So we wanted to have a tool which can simplify our job. We can quickly test the upcoming protocols. So I will also mention along this presentation how this work that we did is related to ITF, and it's mainly related to the transport area working group. It's related to TSVWG. So I have right now with me in this call, Leslie Moni. He is a Intel project fellow at NITK. He is working with me on our Intel project. And we have three students right now who are in the final year of their engineering, Shantanu Rai, Narayan, and Dhanashekar. So Leslie and I were actually doing these kind of projects on TCP optimizations and Linux Q disciplines since last couple of years. And we faced some problems in quickly getting useful results and being able to analyze them on time, because we know that, you know, if there is something which is state of the art, we need to be able to quickly analyze, give feedback to the community so that it can be incorporated during the standardization process itself. Then what we did is Leslie came up with the idea that why don't we make a tool, and we gave this as a course assignment to Shantanu, Narayan, and Dhanashekar when they were in 5th semester, and they took it up very positively, and they continue to work on it for the next semester also. They are continuing to work on it right now also when they are entering into the 7th semester. And when it came up to a decent shape, we decided that we should put together into a form of a paper, as well as it is made openly available. So let me give you a brief about the network stack tester. I'll try to take approximately about 20 minutes, leave 5 minutes for Shantanu to show a quick demo, and then maybe a few minutes for the Q&A. So, okay. So introduction, basically, there are three ways by which we do network experimentation. We go with simulations or emulations or test beds. I have been working with NS3 Network Simulator as a steering committee member since about 2 years, but I have been involved in the development of NS3 simulator, mainly TCP models and Q disciplines, since about 6 years. So what we noticed recently is that there were some differences in how TCP was implemented in NS3 and how actually it is implemented in the kernel. What was implemented in NS3 was also not wrong. It was following a specific RFC, whereas the one that was implemented in the kernel was slightly different. It was not straightforward following what was written in the RFC. So what happened is that the TSVWG started talking about upcoming TCP, which is called TCP Prague. And there are lots of discussions going on, even in ITF 108, there were a lot of discussions going on a new framework called L4S. It is called low latency, low loss, scalable throughput. The idea is to achieve low latency and high throughput, avoid packet losses because they can be very expensive, particularly for the multimedia traffic. So when we started working towards those models on NS3, we realized that we might take a lot of time to develop those models and then be able to do some research. Whereas the community of L4S, which was working on preparing that framework, had already come up with Linux implementations. So they had their own fork of the Linux kernel and they were maintaining that source code in that Linux kernel. So what we started doing is that we started playing around with network namespaces. The reason for going for network namespaces was that even though we have laboratory, it is not possible for us to occupy 10 to 15 machines here and then prepare a test bed. While we could do so, but it's not possible all the time. So we decided to use network namespaces and do network emulations, because using network namespaces, we can virtualize the network stack in the kernel. And we could see that we were able to prepare complex topologies for the experiments, and it was all very cost effective. We didn't have to ask for funding from the institute or ask funding from anybody, because even a student had a laptop, they were able to do experiments on laptop by creating a bunch of network namespaces. So before we thought about making our own tool, we did look into many tools. And in fact, we used the flexible network tester, which you see in the second bullet here, because this tool has very good number of tests for TCP and Q disciplines. And one of the reason we made our own tool was motivated from here, Flent. So we found that Flent has almost all the things that one researcher would need for doing TCP optimizations or Linux Q disciplines, active queue management, or even to test TCP Prague. In fact, the TSVWG is right now, whatever experiments they are running and the discussion is going on, it's all done using Flent. But Flent expects a pre-set up test bed, or it needs the user to know how to use network namespaces. And we also noticed that if the topology under consideration becomes large, then using network namespaces becomes tedious because there could be human mistakes that will get introduced easily. So that is the reason we thought about going for a different tool. And there was another tool, Mininet, which we already know is popularly used for software-defined networking. It handles these network namespaces very well, but it doesn't have the advanced traffic control support which Flint has. So there was also one question asked to us during the ANRW Q&A that why couldn't you combine these two tools? We did think about doing those things, but it was really difficult to combine these two because of the way they were developed. It was not easy for us to integrate Mininet and Flint. And hence we decided that coming up with our own tool is much simpler and less time consuming rather than combining these two tools. Similarly, there are other tools, Transperf is by Google, also for TCP related matters, but it typically expects a testbed to be set up for us to work with. There is another tool called Netesto, and this one, last one, is from Swinburne University, Australia. This also needs TCP testbeds to be set up before we run any kind of experiment. So they give experimental test scenarios, but we do not have the testbeds set up in advance. What we intend to do with Nest is that we, okay. So what we intend to do with Nest is that we want to build intuitive APIs in which not only we provide you options to run experiments, but we also allow to build a virtual network as easily as possible. Although network namespaces are not very difficult to use, the commands are straightforward, but when you look into the complex topologies, it becomes difficult to manage. So we prepared Nest as a Python package, which will simplify the process of network experimentation, and internally it will continue to use Linux network namespaces. So we have right now APIs to build a network, run experiments, and what another problem we faced was how to collect the statistics as efficiently as possible. So when I'm working on TCP congestion control, some of the important parameters that I need are congestion window plots. I need the throughput plots for every flow. And then if I'm looking at the router side, I need to know whether the link was completely utilized and how much amount of queue was being used, how much was the queue delay at the router. So if I have a tool which can provide me the kind of the statistics that are being popularly looked at IETF and in the research community in general, then it would be very simple for people to be to simulate these kind of networks. Another important thing is reproducibility. So if I have done an experiment and I want to share that experiment details with somebody else who is interested in reproducing, we didn't have a straightforward means to do so. So we wanted Nest to be able to reproduce the experiments as easily as possible without too much of an effort on the other side. So as I said, it simplifies the process of reproducing network experiment. We need less physical resources because you don't need actual machines to be there. It is less error prone because we have given APIs so that all those commands which we typically write can be avoided and the simple APIs can be used. And if the, for example, I'm also looking at it from the perspective of how we could introduce these kind of tools for undergraduate and postgraduate courses, because we have been using simulators right now, which is one good exposure to the student, but another exposure to the student is how actually things work in the kernel and how they can play around with emulations and testbed. So we also wanted Nest to be friendly enough for educational purposes, where if the students are still not familiar with concepts of network namespaces or IP route 2 package in Linux kernel, or what is a TC command in Linux kernel, traffic control, or how do we generate traffic using iperf or netperf, they would still be able to run the experiments without knowing, being ignorant of all those things. Then another thing what we thought is that there could be a situation where I have one topology. Let me take an example of a dumbbell topology, which is single bottleneck popular topology used for TCP congestion control. I might be willing to run multiple experiments on this dumbbell topology. And the way I mean multiple experiment is that what is changing from one experiment to another is just the TCP variant under consideration. So with one experiment, I have one TCP, with another experiment, I have another TCP. What we can do with Nest is that we can run these two experiments in parallel on the same machine and there wouldn't be any problem. So that also has been handled. And as it is mentioned, we released the beta version of this particular tool to be used by others. And I'll also tell you who are the people right now who have started using us, using this tool, and they have started giving us some feedback on how we can improve. So we still think our APIs need improvements and we continue to work on improving them. So now this is a simple example of how two-node topology can be set up. It's all using internal network namespaces, we are using virtual Ethernet pairs and everything, but it's not visible. It's all hidden from the user. They don't need to know about this. So for example, when I say N0 here, it's creating one namespace with name N0, another namespace with N1. And this connect API will create actually a weth pair, ETH0, ETH1. Of course, the name here is N0, N1, but I'm using a simple term. ETH0, ETH1 may be two endpoints of a weth pair. And when we create a weth pair, by default, they sit into the default namespace. So with this connect API, will create a weth pair, push the ETH0 to N0 namespace, push the ETH1 interface to N1 namespace, and it will establish the communication. Then we can give IP addresses, we can configure link properties, we can configure asymmetric links here if we need, and then we can just give the name of the experiment and configure how many flows we want. So we want a flow to run from N0 to N1 on a specific IP address, which is the destination, start time, end time, and the number of flows. So internally, this uses NetPerf tool to generate this particular flow, and then we run the experiment. Let me show you how exactly this works. So this is the same code that we looked into. The part from where we create the node, set up the links, IP addresses, and the link parameters, we have three modules in Nest: engine module, topology module, and experiment module. These things are all handled in the topology module, which actually goes and hits the IP route 2 package in the kernel. It just tells the engine module to run these commands from the IP route 2 package. So that is the responsibility of the topology module. And the remaining thing that you see on the right are the APIs that we have created for configuring different kinds of flows. So you can create multiple flows here. You can create TCP flows, UDP flows. And another important thing that is there is topology map. Why this is needed is because user can give any kind of names to the namespaces here. Like example, I gave N0, N1. But a moment before I spoke about the fact that we can run multiple instances of the same topology. And what user might do is just have two Python scripts with the same name and wants to run. So this topology map takes the user given names of the namespaces, but internally maps them to a different unique namespace so that there are no conflicts when multiple instances of the same program are running just with one TCP different inside that. So this is a architecture that we have. Coming to scope and limitations, right now, this tool we feel can be used for studying Q disciplines, for studying TCP congestion control parameters. We support NetPerf, iPerf, HTTP perf is not yet added, but addition of such tools is relatively easy. And more importantly, one GSOC project, Google Summer of Code project right now, which is on TCP Prague, being mentored by the founder of NS3, they used Nest because what they wanted to do is they wanted to build a TCP Prague model for NS3, but they wanted to ensure that that model which they build in NS3 gives equivalent results to the model of TCP Prague in Linux kernel. In NS3, there is another utility which is called direct code execution. So that is called usually as NS3 DCE. NS3 DCE allows you to take a Linux library, or you can take a FreeBSD library and run inside NS3 environment. So you can actually have your real kernel network stack being simulated in an NS3 environment. Unfortunately, what has happened, DCE is not supporting at this point of time any kernel version more than 4.4. But we know right now that already kernel 5.8 has come out. So point is that whatever new algorithms have come after Linux kernel 4.4, we cannot test them inside NS3 environment. So one of my purpose of developing this tool was not just to ease off the research activities here, but also to give a way for NS3 developers to ensure that the models that they develop in NS3 are equivalent of Linux. So I'm happy to share that the student who worked on the GSOC project used Nest rigorously to extract the results from the Linux kernel model of Prague. And he had developed the model of Prague in NS3, and he was able to compare and show that his model of NS3 matches with the one which is in the kernel. Similar to that, Google has BBR congestion control. We recently completed modeling BBR in NS3 and comparing with BBR in Linux kernel. And there is another version that we are working on right now, which is BBR v2, which is an enhanced version of BBR by Google. So again, we used Nest to take out the experiments of BBR v2. My another team of students is working on developing NS3 model of BBR v2. And then we will be comparing both to ensure that the models that we build in simulators match the real world as much as possible. There are some limitations of this approach though. For example, if you have any hardware level optimizations, suppose you are using BQL, byte queue limits, or if you are using some of the features which are usually offloaded to NIC, for example, the TSO offload or GSO, then such kind of things will not be captured, because here we are not using any hardware NIC. We are all using virtual NICs. Right now we support, this tool can work only on the Linux kernel. We haven't yet tested it or tried running it on BSD. And there is a lack of debugging functions right now. So we are mainly working on this feature right now, because if there is any issue that the user faces in Nest, debugging is very difficult at this point of time. So we expect to improve it. Okay, going.
One question.
Sure.
One question is there. Can you give some example for different TCP stacks to be tested?
Yeah, so different TCP stacks, I would say different TCPs to be tested. So for example, the Cubic is one default TCP right now in the kernel. And the proposal is that TCP Prague will be better than Cubic. So one of the examples that I can give is that if you have a Linux kernel implementation of TCP Prague loaded in your OS right now, let us say 5.4 is where TCP Prague was. So you have a Linux 5.4 loaded in your machine. It already has Cubic because that's a default TCP. Now what you could do is you could have two instances running. In one instance, Cubic is being emulated. In the other one, Prague is being emulated. So if you want to look at the example, I think I will request Shantanu to open up the Python script so I can go back. Sorry. Let me come here. So typically, this is the place where you add a flow, and we have given an option here for you as a user to specify in the script itself. Suppose you want to use Cubic or you want to use TCP Prague, like I said. So if you have this file in front of you, you put this file as Cubic, make a copy of this file, and in that file you remove Cubic and put Prague, and now run both the files in parallel. You will have Cubic running in one instance, you will have TCP Prague running in another instance. Does that answer the question, Dhruv?
Yeah, I think so. So anyway, we'll hear it back if there is some this thing. There are two more questions, so let me quickly ask that. One question is related to Mininet. Mininet had limitation that the namespace names were not exposed outside Mininet. Does Nest uses named namespaces such that one can push traffic from outside Python API?
Okay, I think maybe Leslie will be able to handle this question. So Leslie, are you here?
So maybe.
Okay, maybe
Leslie,
we can take this at the end. Otherwise.
Yeah, so maybe when you are doing the demo, you can just try to answer this one.
Yeah, sure.
There is another question from Rahul. How does Nest compares to MIT's Mahi Mahi, Stanford's Pantheon, Martin's, Siemens, Google, Quick network testers? All of them are specifically designed to test congestion and flow control algos and transport protocols.
Yeah, I can give a quick answer. The names that you mentioned, some of them I know. For example, Pantheon I know. So we did talk to the Pantheon community. Unfortunately, we cannot try any of our own experiments on Pantheon. It's not freely available. We have to send them all our algorithm and code, and they will deploy it, and then they will give the results to us. So that was a limitation of Pantheon. Mahi Mahi emulator, again, I think Leslie can give a more detailed idea, because we have looked at Mahi Mahi emulator also, and there were some limitations in working with Mahi Mahi also. But the other names which were mentioned, I don't think I am aware of it, but if time permits, maybe at the end, Dhruv, can we take those questions and I'll revisit this question again? Yeah.
Yeah, I would suggest, can Leslie and all type the answers to these questions?
That would be good, yeah.
I've put them as panelists, so maybe they can simply answer it offline, and you can continue. You have 5 more minutes.
Okay, great. So Leslie, please continue answering the questions, whichever you can, otherwise we can take them towards the end, okay? So one of the feedback that we got from the reviewers in the paper was that, how do we know that Nest is at least comparable to physical testbed? In the sense that, how do we ensure that the results obtained from Nest are completely not away from what you typically get in a physical testbed? So we use this simple testbed where 1 Gbps link is feeding 100 megabits link, and we used 4 cubic TCP flows from 0 to 1, and we compared a bunch of parameters. For example, the congestion window, obtained from Nest and the congestion window obtained from the physical testbed when the queuing algorithm used was controlled delay, CODEL. Similarly, we ran with a simple queuing algorithm called FIFO, and we measured the CWND for the Nest as well as for the physical testbed. So these were the TCP related parameters CWND. This is per flow throughput. So for every flow out of 4, we plotted throughput for Nest, throughput for the physical testbed. Again, for FIFO, throughput for Nest and physical testbed. This is also an endpoint parameter called throughput. Then we measured router-based parameters, for example, link utilization. So we wanted to check whether 100 megabits of link is completely utilized or not. So you can see comparison of physical testbed and Nest for CODEL, and physical testbed results and Nest results with FIFO. And then queue backlog. So we wanted to check that when the link is completely utilized, there are chances that the queue will start filling up. How much is the queue backlog when we use physical testbed, and how much is it when we use Nest? So these are the results with 2 different queuing algorithms. Then in the paper, we added a relatively complex topology to put the motivation for making Nest here, that if you have a multiple bottleneck topology, which is right now also being considered in TSVWG for evaluating L4S framework, that they want that single bottleneck dumbbell topology is fine, but will the algorithm work in when there are multiple bottlenecks? So here you can see router 0 to 1 is one bottleneck, 1 to 2 is another bottleneck, and so on and so forth. So all of these are multiple bottleneck, and we said that you can create these experiments in Nest relatively easier than manually using commands of network namespaces to be able to do so. So these are again some parameters. We have tried putting congestion window of just a couple of flows here. For example, you can see A3 is a flow that starts at the left side and gets completed here. It passes through multiple bottlenecks to reach the destination. So we have just put the results for A3 because of space and time constraint, but we will give you a link where all our results are available, and we'll be very happy to get any feedback from those who are listening about the tool as well as about the results. So this is congestion window, throughput, and we plotted RTT. This is about link utilization of 3 routers that we took. Why we took 3 routers is because router 0 is 50 Mbps. Then there are some routers with 150 megabits. Then there is a router with 100 megabits. So we took one representative of each bandwidth. So 100 megabits one router, 150 one router, and 50 one router. And then we show that all of them are completely saturated. All the results are available here. Please feel free to look into it. So that is all from my side. The tool can be downloaded from the PI, Python PI package, and that is the website. These are our email addresses. I'll quickly pass on the control. I'll stop sharing and pass on to Shantanu. So Dhruv, we have time for 5 minutes demo.
Yes, let's do this.
Okay.
Okay, hello. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
yes,
hi, Shantanu, go ahead.
Hi,
You can
Shantanu.
share the screen.
Okay, thanks. Sure. Yeah. I hope my screen is visible to you guys.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So I'll do a quick demo for a Nest program emulating a peer router peer topology. So we have 2 nodes and a router, and so I'll quickly go over the APIs used. So we create a couple of nodes here. We enable forwarding in the router, and we assign addresses and set the routing to ensure that packets are going. And yeah, an important thing to note is we are setting link attributes here. That is, we set the link attribute in N1 and R1 to be 100 Mbit with 5 milliseconds, and R1 and N2 to be 10 Mbit with 40 milliseconds, and we install PIE or Pi queue discipline on R1 router. And what we do is we create 2 flows from N1 to N2 for 20 seconds. So that's what all this does. So maybe I'll quickly run the experiment to just show you, give a flavor of how the plot will look like at the end of it. So to run, you will have to, currently you will have to use sudo because we are using network namespaces, and I guess you require the capnet admin capability. So for that sake, it's being run as root. So this will run. So for when I ran this program, it created this network namespaces. I mean, so in the background, if you just run IP netness to view all the namespaces, you can see that it created the namespaces with a unique ID of sorts. So basically, if I had multiple instances running, they would have different unique IDs and the names wouldn't collide. Yeah, and now we see that the experiment has been run. So for the 20 seconds, netperf flows were run from N1 to N2, and we can view the stats that Nest has collected in a file. So whatever Nest collects, all the stats, it dumps it all into a file. So this would be the file because it shows it around this time. Yeah, so let's just see the delivery rate. So this would be the, okay, maybe I can, yeah, just a second. Yeah, so this is basically the amount of packets going out of N1, the netperf is sending out from N1. We can see that since we set the bottleneck to be at 10 Mbit, initially netperf is trying to fully saturate the links. So it's trying to send more packets than the bottleneck. Eventually, packets are being dropped and it goes back to the bottleneck. And maybe I'll show 2 or 3 more plots. Maybe we can have a look at the latency. And just a second, let me also show the queue length. Yeah. So if you look at the latency and the queue length, since we installed Pi, I think the bottleneck is at 90 or 100 milliseconds. So Pi tries its best to keep it at around that length. And if you see closely, both the plots almost look very similar. So that shows like a nice correlation between queue length and latency. I guess that's about it. Okay, maybe I'll show one more plot. This would be the CWND plot, that is the congestion window plot that Nest gives for the 2 flows that's flowing. Yeah, I think that should.
Just I would like to add one point, Shantanu. Can you open up the throughput plot? Because there is something that I would like to mention here quickly. So as Shantanu was telling that eventually after 2.5 seconds, we can see that throughput, some of the throughput is coming around 10 Mbps. But one of the surprising thing that you would see is that in the beginning, you can see that the throughput is going and touching up to 25 Mbps and above. Now, that's actually not possible in the real world. When you have a bottleneck of 10 Mbps, you cannot get throughput of 25 Mbps. So this is something that we identified when we were using Flent or any other tool, because what happens in the kernel is that throughput is measured at the sender side rather than at the receiver side. So this is an estimate of the amount of data being sent. Out of it, some of the data will definitely get dropped because of congestion. So rather than using the sender side estimate, in our next update that we are going to put in Nest, we have been talking to a few kernel developers also. They pointed us to one important module, which is called delivery rate estimation. And by using the delivery rate estimation, we will be able to calculate the throughput at the receiver side, which will eliminate all the packet drops that have happened. And then we will not see this unusual behavior in the plot that throughput is more than 25 Mbps. So throughput is 25 Mbps even when the total bottleneck is 10 Mbps. So I just wanted to mention that. Yeah, that's all. I think we are done with the presentation, right, Shantanu? Or you had anything else to share?
Okay. Yes, all that is it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shantanu. Thank you, Mohit. Let's move to the next presentation. Can you unshare, Shantanu?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. So let's move on to the next presentation. Can you guys see my screen? No, right?
No.
My suddenly. Okay, doesn't matter. Let's not waste time on this. Oh yeah, I found it. Somehow it was hanging. Okay. So the last presentation that we have today is the IETF's view of network slicing. This has been discussed in the TEAS working group, where there is a design team which was made mainly to make sure that the IETF definition of network slicing is finalized. And Kiran is a member of that design team. Kiran has almost 20 years experience in development of network platform softwares and design of network protocols. She has contributed to various standards body, apart from IETF, also ETSI, ITU, IEEE, ACM. She is recently involved also in the Network 2030 vision at ITOT. You must have heard about this. This was in the news recently. As a as a research principal, her topics of interest include future network architecture, design for cloud scale routing protocol, backhaul network efficiency, and service programming. Prior to joining FutureWay, she was in Cisco. She's joining us from US, so let's welcome her. Thank you for waking up early for us. Kiran, go ahead. You unmute yourself and share the screen.
Yeah, hi guys. Good evening to everyone. I'm just beginning to share my slides.
Visible.
Cool. So thanks a lot, Dhruv, for inviting me on this talk. And actually, when I was preparing these slides, it gave me a very good view of how we are going about working with transport slices in IETF. So it was a pretty good exercise. Just an outline of the talk. I'll just share some of the work we have done in terms of defining the scope of the slices itself, and what are the other secondary work that was done even prior to we set up the design team. So just to baseline the discussion, actual concept is network slices that came into existence around 2015 when we were starting to talk about 5G verticals. So 5G had this vision that we will have new verticals such as smart cars or AR/VR kind of enhanced mobile broadband kind of services, or a smart grid for your electricity meters and power networks. So you would have a very strict requirements of quality of service or other constraints from the network. So how are you going to build those type of networks? It's not possible to build a separate physical infrastructure for these things. So general idea would be you will have a common infrastructure and you will segment that common infrastructure based on what kind of network resources you require for each vertical. So that was the general idea behind network slice, that you're carving a part of the physical network for your own use. And it is not just one aspect. As you must have seen from Shraddha's presentation, that we have access networks, core networks, and the data center. So you need to connect all these things together. From our perspective, this is where the difference between network slices and transport slice comes into picture. If you look at this picture from bottom to top, you have an end-to-end network slice. It will have different components. Some of them will touch the radio access side of the things, or the other broadband access, DSL or something. And then you have data center or a core network in terms of 5G on the other end. What you have in between is transport, something that is carrying your information from point A to point B. And that is the transport network for us. And this is how we defined, and that was actually one of the biggest contribution from this design team, that we clarified the scope of transport network. Anything that is related to IP, MPLS, and optical networks is a transport network. And that is why we found a house in T's working group, because that deals with all sorts of transport related services in IETF. So what does a transport slice looks like? So what I just talked about, that you could have different users connected to a different kind of access and RAN networks. You may have some functions running on the access side. They will follow a completely different kind of a part of access network slice. And what we are concerned with is the connectivity aspect, that how this access network is connected to your data center on the other side, or it could be a core network in 5G. And what I have here is like these two interfaces together form a blue transport slice, and I could have a green transport slice running here. And it's not just one single transport end-to-end slice. Depending upon how your network is designed, like you have a WAN network, or you could have different ring topologies in the metro and all. you could have multiple transport slices together. And it is up to an operator or the controller to decide how they build up these slices together, these transport slices together. So with this background, let's get into the definition part. And again, we were very conscious about not describing anything super complex. We wanted to keep it simple and find out what is the differentiating factor. And there were two key takeaways from the definition. One, that it is a logical network. It has to be simple, not too abstract, in the sense that all we wanted to say that it is technology agnostic. We don't care how you build your physical infrastructure. Only thing we care about is how to connect the different endpoints. And the most important requirement for us is our service level objectives. Now the question is, what are those service level objectives? Again, there was a lot of talk about what can be described as an SLO. So for that, we have to go back into looking into two aspects. One is that from the network operator's perspective, a term service level agreement, SLA, is very common. And if you dig into IETF literature, it is very difficult to find terminology for SLA, SLO, and SLI together. And this is one of the contribution from our definitions document. What we have done is clearly define that this is the definition of service level indicator, which is actually the measurement of a particular resource objective you're looking at. For example, if you ask for a bandwidth between range 10 Mbps and 15 Mbps, if you measure at this point, you're getting 12 Mbps. That is your service level indicator. Your service level objective will define that kind of a range, that I want my bandwidth to be between 10 to 15. And SLA will be a higher level business entity that would say that, hey, I need some kind of a broadband service and I should be able to attain up to 15 Mbps bandwidth. So from our transport slices perspective, we don't care as much about the SLAs. For us, everything is consumed in terms of SLOs, because we were very conscious that we need to be able to build Yang model around it. And when you want to do that, you want parameters to be visible, observable, and measurable. And so for example, we clearly say that some of the obvious SLOs are what is the bandwidth guarantee or the latency guarantee, how much jitter or the packet delay variation can I afford. And it also included some other network function resources like firewall, description of the firewall, or load balancers, but it's kind of at a lower priority. Main focus is on the network specific resources such as bandwidth, latency. We discussed that we need to be able to describe other requirements about transport slices as well. So something like security is a big criteria, and the use case for that is if you have remote sites connecting to a financial institution or a banking headquarter, sometimes they require a physical link connectivity between their remote sites. They do not want to run on the shared infrastructure, and they want everything to be encrypted because of the regulations from different countries. And that's why security is an important requirement for them. They should be, when they're describing their transport slice, they should be able to describe those things. But on the, and similarly for availability, this was already covered from Shraddha's presentation, that in her slide 4, she also mentioned that high availability is one of the important criteria for 5G. And then we can also have geographical restrictions. You saw one use case in previous presentation as well. So there were other things we initially added, something like resiliency and redundancy. And we discussed that these things are not really something you can measure. As a consumer of a slice, how do you prove that your system has redundancy support? So we found these things were implementation specific and they were moved out from the definitions draft. In the transport slices, we also have the concept of endpoints. In the normal terminology or language in T's, normally you will hear people talking about termination points, but we decided to call them transport slices endpoints. So looking at the figure from, just using the figure from the previous slides, we have wherever my transport slice terminates, those are going to be my endpoints. And this clarification is very important because we are not talking about the end users here. We are talking about the endpoints from where the from where a particular transport slide starts and end. Second aspect related to transport slices is, yes, you have a logical network, a logical description from the consumer who wants to use your network for its own use, but it needs to be eventually mapped and anchored into actual resource consumption in the network. So this mapping will require something called a mechanism. We are calling it realization. And this will have some physical endpoints. For example, I will have some kind of a router here, PE router, or a firewall or load balancer, which has to satisfy certain criteria for my transport slice. So those are called the realization points. And my TSCs are the logical ones, and TSR is the actual physical endpoints in the real network. So this is the, those were the things we defined in our definitions document. And that is one of the first outcome from NSDT team, first result. And second document, or the output we were working on, was the framework document, in which we describe different stakeholders and how information will flow from a transport slice. How will you conceptualize it, define it, and then realize it? So this is a very straightforward framework. I took this figure from the framework draft. You will have a customer which will talk to some high level entity, an orchestrator or something, to request for a transport slice. And the request will be in the form of, hey, I need some kind of mobile broadband service with 100 Mbps per user, and I want my jitter to be so and so. And this operator will consume that information, use a northbound interface model, and send this information to a transport slice controller, which performs the mapping to underlying network using transport network controllers. So here we anchored most of our work around transport slice controller. We don't care about the internal implementation, how transport slice controller is implemented, but it is that logical entity which sits in between your underlying physical network and your orchestrator. What it does, it provides the mapping from your logical to the physical interfaces. And one of the major contribution we really want to make from NSDT is to define this NBI interface clearly. And in fact, if we have clearly defined and described what we need from TSC NBI, most of our work is done already. From the network controller perspective, we could use many existing Yang models, for example, L2SM, L3SM, L3VPN. You could have different technologies that could be translated, and this mapping can be done from the controller perspective. How you do it, which model you use will be quite relevant to the kind of network controllers you have. And another beauty of this framework is that quite likely you do not have to do anything related to transport slices in your network controller. Since you're just describing your concept at the slice controller level, all you need to, and your mapping resides in the controller, all you need to do is send down the information. The network controller itself need not know that it is creating or allocating these resources for a particular slice, because all that mapping is done at the slice controller level. And so I already covered the interfaces that we have. Northbound interface, which is how a consumer or a customer will request for a transport slice, and southbound interfaces related to how things get mapped into the physical network, and not just that, but also how the mapping is done. Sorry, not mapping, but the monitoring. And we, in one of the slides, I showed you that it is not just one end-to-end transport slice. Depending upon your network, you could have different segments of transport slices, and then you would need to connect them together. So in order to support that kind of extension, we have introduced two concepts: a horizontal transport slice and a vertical transport slice. So we tried not to use the hierarchical concept, but vertical slices are nothing but some sort of hierarchical concept. What you have is, for example, you could create an optical slice, and which has certain kind of lambda associated with what resource is it. Like, for example, here you could have TS122 as your optical slice. And then because your transport slice controller understands IP networks better, you will have some kind of a mapping, and then your TS12 will be a combination of optical slice or maybe something else, and it is presented as a single IP slice. Similarly, if you could have, we support multiple technology domains. For example, your TS11 could be an MPLS domain, and your TS12 could be a segment routing domain. It could be SRv6 or SRMPLS. And you should be able to connect those two domains together to form an end-to-end slice, which is a single transport slice like TS1. So what you're exposing is just TS1 to the top layer. And so there is, that was pretty much the major work we covered in the framework. And then let's come down to the mapping part. We will do the top level. We have a description of a transport slice where we say what my SLOs are, and you can define different endpoints, which are all logical. And our SBI is used to actually map those interfaces into the physical network, and those aspects are called realization. And to be honest, from NSDT perspective, we are not looking as much on the realization aspect, because some of our earlier analysis shows that we already have a lot of technologies in place from the realization perspective. And what we need to know is just, what we need to do is just form a way to bind those things together into transport slices. But it is, it's a good takeaway to understand that transport slices is actually a two-part construct. One is where you define the logical information which stays till the transport slice controller, and it is the customer view of the transport slices. And then there will be realization aspect, which will actually be distributed across the network. And no single network like network 1 or network B will have the full view of that logical transport slice. They will only see the part they are associated with. And so since, as I mentioned, that there is already, the discussion on slices started on 2015, in 2015 timeframe. And at that point, roughly around that time, ACTN work was going on. And what it talked about is an abstraction of the transport networks. And this work was actually quite relevant to network slices, but since we did not have any clear requirement from network slices at that time, we did not do exact mapping of ACTN, but it has always been the initial framework that maps into the transport slices. And it becomes more, and ACTN is actually quite a mature technology now. They have done some demos, and the framework, YAG models, most of the data models related to ACTN are already ready. both on the MPI side of things and CMI side of things. So we think that the transport slice controller way we have defined in the framework could map to MDSC. You might need to have certain extensions where your NBI will have to, your CMI will have to adapt to NBI. But if you see your ACTN framework, MDSC sits very well with the slice controller. And the beauty of that is that in that case, it can handle all the southbound interface through MPI. So this is a solution which is very close to ready almost. And we don't have to care about SBI in its ourselves here. We would just rely on MPI to provide all the mapping information. It may need some extensions in terms of monitoring the slices. For example, service assurance is a very important aspect of slices, and this is what differentiates it from rest of the VPN or other transport technologies. And we want that constant ongoing monitoring for every single resource. I mean, the effort is on making sure that no SLO violation happens. And another aspect is there is a third draft which is being worked on. It is called NBI Yang data model for transport slices. And in this model, I actually like this slide from their presentation. They presented it in 108. And they were thinking about what kind of approach to take with NBI. And to be honest, although we have very good network and topology models, they are extremely complex and they have inflated over time. So what we wanted to do was to pick up something very straightforward that uses transport slice as a first order object itself. So instead of augmenting existing models, we started with our own first order objects, that what a transport slice is, it has certain endpoints, SLO groups, and what are the monitoring aspects of it. So based on that, this model is being worked, and this is a very generic tree structure of that model, that you could have a certain set of templates, and from that template, you will choose one particular template that suits your requirement, and based on that you will instantiate a transport slice by specifying what kind of topology you need, what kind of SLOs you are requesting, and what are the different endpoints. And then this is just the local state about the mappings, how these things get mapped. So for example, if you look at ACTN model in your MDSC, as long as you can provide this kind of mapping from your MPI into MDSC, we are pretty much done. So that's how things between existing work and our NBI model will fit in. And this, to be honest, is a very complex work, and I'm still trying to understand the motivation behind it myself. This is the second approach. It is proposed by a few other guys, and they believe that you already have a network topology model, and a transport slice is no different from any other network. So why don't you just augment those models? And then they went about explaining that if you're looking for two slices, how would you translate into using a TE overlay? What they were trying to do here was that to map different existing models just by augmenting some of the requirements that come from transport slices. And it's a pretty complex document from what I have read so far, and I think we need to clean it up a bit and make it more relevant. How this will sit?
Kiran, can I interject? I'm so sorry. Just one point. In fact, after the ITF 108 meeting, both the Yang document authors had a conversation, and what we wanted to clearly clarify was this: the authors of this model, which is currently on the slide, they want to claim that this is a transport slice realization model. So this will very clearly map whatever is the NBI to the actual network topology. That's why, as you see in this diagram, the idea of mapping blue and red to the physical topology, that's something which is being captured in this model. So this automatically becomes something that would be internal to the transport slice controller and hidden to the end-to-end system. So it will no longer be called a transport slice NBI. This is mainly a transport slice realization model local to the transport slice controller, telling how he has done the mapping of NBI to its actual network.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I had pretty much the same idea about it, especially when you go through different examples that how a TE overlay or how an optical network will map into it. I agree with you, but I still think there is a very high level of complexity in this model, and we should try to figure out how we can simplify it further. So this is the last piece of the puzzle. While we were working on NSTT, a work on enhanced VPN was started. And again, this model, in this framework, they mention that you cannot support transport slices unless, or network slices in general, unless you get some kind of resource assurance from the data plane itself, that your data plane has to guarantee if you are requesting a particular bandwidth or a certain kind of latency, that has to be followed. And so there are a lot of similarities between the enhanced VPN model framework and the one we have defined in our NSTT related framework model. But their focus is more from the data plane. They take this approach bottom up that, hey, I have certain enabling technologies at data plane level, and then we will build control plane and management plane together. And some of the candidate technologies they talked about from the data plane is flexible Ethernet. You could have a dedicated queue, DetNet, time-sensitive networking. So these are the things you could use in order to provide actual guarantees. And interesting thing is they are talking about resource isolation. I did not add that slide because I didn't believe I will have time to talk about that. But they take an approach that today in the best effort network, we have some sort of statistical model. If you want to send packet A from point A to B with certain latency or bandwidth, you may or may not get serviced. Then you have something in between with the shared infrastructure. If you have certain level of priority associated with your flow, you will get that kind of resource guarantee, that kind of resource allocation allocated to you, but it is not always guaranteed. And then there is something which is on the extreme right-hand side of this spectrum where you say, okay, your network is very close to as if you have the hardware resource dedicated to it. In that case, you're always guaranteed that you will get that resource in terms of whether it is bandwidth, latency, scheduling. So this is, and while we were discussing this whole transport slices, we figured out that describing isolation is quite important. So this is still a pending work for T's working group. We are going to define isolation and how user could use it or express it. So this is my final slide now. So if you sum it up, what happens here is on the left-hand side, this is the work that is this is most recent work where we talked about what is the framework for transport slices, what is the definition of transport slice itself. And then you will have certain northbound and southbound interfaces. And this is my enhanced VPN that talks about once you have this information, how you actually consume it into the network. And what I'm showing here in blue is the corresponding technologies of the work that is done in IETF framework. For example, we have NBI Yang model that I talked about, how ACTN will fit into the transport slice controller notion, how the realization of the transport slices is done, where Dhruv chimed in. And then we have the enhanced VPN, which is talking about what kind of control plane or data plane extensions will be required. Some of the technologies are already there, but of course, we still need to do a lot. I think we know at a high level now that from ITF what we want to do in terms of transport slices, but we are still at 3,000 feet, if not 10,000 feet. To come down lower, we still need to do a lot of work on how we can do monitoring and observability of transport slices, not just from what is being done in the physical network. You have to aggregate that information, consume it, and expose it to your customers also. We haven't talked about that at all in T's working group. Hopefully going forward, we will do that. And somehow we did not pay a lot of attention to service functions yet. So this is something which has been bothering me. We talked about just connectivity aspects to start with, but I think service functions will also play an important role because 5G core network is going to be a distributed network. And to have these service functions placed anywhere in the network is quite important. And from the edge computing perspective also. I also touched upon isolation. So as I said, we have a lot of high level work which has already been done. It gives us a very clear view about transport slices, but lower level nuts and bolts still have to be clearly described. So if you guys are interested on a particular aspect, if you think something that needs to be done, I'll encourage you to join the T's working group, which is where most of the work for transport slices is done. There may be other places like BGP, IDR related, where they will expose some of the routing protocol related aspects, but the core work is being done in the T's working group. And that's pretty much what I had. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Kiran. Kiran, we have one question which was regarding the initial SLO discussion. The question is, the service recovery time slash downtime is one of the SLAs. So bit surprised to see that this is missed out in your SLO slide. Not sure why it is considered as not measurable. So mainly talking about service recovery time slash downtime.
Yeah, so service recovery time we do not cover immediately because we did not have any formal definition of it, but we do have availability. So, and one of the thing was that once you know availability, recovery can be derived from it. Some of the things you could derive from other parameters. So we had a long discussion about it. And as long as you describe your availability, that's fine. And I think Joel was making one of the comment that if you have to talk about recovery time, you have already reached the service SLO violation. As long as you have availability, you're good enough.
Thank you, Kiran. Kiran, one more question related to horizontal and vertical slices, which was, I think, in slide number 10 for you. Are you expecting multiple hierarchy of transport slice controllers, or are these multiple slices envisioned at the same controller? So my main question is, are all the lower level transport slices also exposed to the higher end system, or are they hidden? And if they are hidden, why are they called slices?
That is an interesting question. So why do we have this hierarchy? There are two reasons for it, because I could not figure out how to connect the horizontal slices. So for me, most important thing is horizontal. Hierarchy is important in general from the abstraction perspective when you're going from lower level to high level. So yes, in some senses, I see multiple transport slice controllers, and what they need to do is just expose part of just the abstract information about their network. And the most critical use case here is from the optical network. Sometimes when you're transitioning from optical network to IP, you don't want to expose all your internal resources that you don't want to say, hey, I'll give you this Lambda and you go ahead and set up your IP network. What you want to do is just provide an abstract information based on what kind of SLO requirements you have. So what I envision is that you will have certain hierarchy of transport slice controllers as well. And it's not very difficult, because once you standardize, and that's the value of standardizing SBI and NBI, because that lets you extend your model hierarchically.
Thank you, Kiran.
Did
Any
that-
other questions? Okay, thank you, Kiran. Let's move on. I have just one more slides, a request, like, we were doing a survey for like people who attended ITF 108 or did not attend ITF 108, and what is the reason why folks did not attend, so that we can understand what's the main reason for remote participation to ITF 108 from India being little less. So even if you did not participate, can you just give a small survey, as well as this survey will give you some feedback about our activity. I've posted the link in the chat window as well. So please help us out to figure out how we can improve things from our end. And finally, thank you. Thanks everyone for attending. We overran for a little bit, but that's okay. We had a very good, fruitful discussion. I'm open to keeping the meeting on. If somebody has any questions that was not answered before, people who would like to leave, it's pretty late, so it's fine. But if somebody still has any questions, we can have that discussion. It's totally up to you. So folks are still here. You can put the question. I can even give you the mic access if you want to speak. And if not, then that's good too. I'll wait for just 5 more minutes if anybody has any questions. And I see, yes, there's a question regarding slides and recording. We always put the slides and recording in the same blog post. So if you go to iisoc.in/blog, in the blog that exists right now for this meeting, I will update that blog with the slides and recording as well. Okay, thanks everyone. Enjoy your weekend. Thanks to our speakers, and thanks Kiran especially for what's the time like? 8 o'clock for you?
Yeah, it's not that bad.
So enjoy your coffee. Have a good day. Enjoy your this thing. Good night to everyone else. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thanks a lot, guys.